High in the upper reaches of the Himalayas, where the air thins into a pale whisper and the world falls silent beneath the weight of endless snow, there lies a place almost untouched by time. The mountains rise like the bones of ancient gods, jagged and merciless, cutting through clouds as if the sky itself fears them. Travelers who pass through this region say the air feels different here, colder, sharper, almost aware, as if something waits in the stillness, watching. Nestled in this remote corner of the world, surrounded by cliffs of ice and wind that howls like a wounded creature, lies a tiny lake. At first glance, it looks unremarkable, just a shallow pool of frozen water in a forgotten valley. But Roopkund is not an ordinary lake. When winter locks the mountains in silence, the lake is nothing more than a hard slab of ice. But when summer arrives, when the sun begins to melt the surface, something stirs beneath, shapes, shadows, and then bones, human bones. They rise from the melting water like ghosts returning from a long sleep. Skulls, ribs, spines, femurs, hundreds of them, scattered around the lake's edge and across the surrounding snow. Bones bleached by centuries of cold. Bones broken in ways that defy explanation. Bones belonging to men, women, and children, all frozen in the same moment of death. For generations, Roopkund has been known by one name, the Skeleton Lake. And even today, no one truly understands what happened here. The story of its discovery begins in 1942. A British forest ranger, patrolling the region during World War II, ventured into these mountains he expected quiet. Snow, emptiness. What he found instead made him stop dead in his tracks. Beneath a melting patch of ice, a hollow eye socket stared up at him, a human skull, perfectly preserved by the cold. He thought perhaps it was a lone traveler who had fallen victim to the brutal terrain. But as he stepped closer, the snow around him began to shift, revealing more bones. And more within minutes, he realized he was standing in the middle of a massive field of human remains. No battle had taken place here. No records mentioned a massacre, no graves, no weapons, no signs of struggle, just bodies everywhere, frozen where they had fallen. When word reached the authorities, an investigation began, and the deeper they ventured, the stranger the mystery became. Because Roopkund is not a place where people simply end up. The lake sits at nearly 5,000 meters above sea level, a place difficult to reach even with modern equipment. The air is thin. The cold kills quickly. Storms appear without warning, swallowing climbers in minutes. Yet somehow, hundreds of people once stood here together. But why? Locals had an answer long before science arrived. They told an old legend, one whispered through generations around dimly lit fires, a story about a king and his entourage who once crossed these sacred mountains. They sang, they danced, they celebrated, and in doing so, they angered the goddess Nanda Devi. As punishment, she sent a storm, one unlike anything the world had ever seen. Hail rained from the sky in massive spheres, each one heavy enough to crush bone. The entire caravan perished on the spot, a myth, until researchers examined the skulls. Many showed round, deep fractures, holes and dents identical in size, shape, and pattern. Wounds caused not by weapons, but by heavy objects falling from above. Suddenly, the legend didn't seem like a legend at all. But even this explanation raised more questions, because the skeletons didn't all belong to the same group. Some dated back 1,000 years. Others belonged to people who lived centuries apart. And strangest of all, some remains carried DNA not native to India. They came from distant parts of the Mediterranean, Greece, Turkey, perhaps even southern Europe. What were people from the Mediterranean doing in the upper Himalayas? Why were they traveling with a group of Indians? And what force killed them all so suddenly? These questions hung in the air, like the cold mist drifting across the lake's surface. And as scientists dug deeper, the mystery only grew darker. The bones were scattered in patterns that didn't make sense. Many bodies lay in a circle, as if they had been standing together. Others were positioned as though they had been thrown backward by a sudden impact. Not a single one showed signs of running away. It was as if the sky itself had opened, and something catastrophic had fallen upon them all at once. Even today, trekkers who visit Roopkund speak of a strange energy surrounding the lake. Some say the silence feels unnatural, too heavy, too complete, as though sound itself refuses to enter the valley. Others claim the wind carries whispers, faint and distant, like the echo of ancient voices trapped in the mountains. Many report nightmares after camping near the lake, visions of a crowd walking across the snow, turning their faces upward and collapsing one by one. Roopkund is more than a mystery. It is a place where history feels alive, where ghosts linger in the frozen air, waiting for the cold to melt and the living to find them once again. What happened here was no accident, no ordinary storm, and no simple tragedy, because as the ice melts each summer, more bones rise from the depths. Bones that seem to come from nowhere. Bones that do not match the ones found before. As if the lake has not finished telling its story, as if the dead are still trying to speak. The deeper researchers pushed into the valley, the more they realized Roopkund wasn't a place where death simply happened. It was a place where death waited, a place that chose its victims, a place whose silence felt deliberate, as though the mountain itself guarded a truth too old, too painful, or too dangerous to be revealed. After the first expeditions collected the bones, scientists transported them to laboratories for closer study. What they found was unsettling. Many skeletons still had traces of flesh and hair attached, preserved by centuries of ice. Some skulls bore deep, circular fractures, identical in size, as if every victim had been struck by the same type of object. Others had clean, sharp cracks along the top, as though the force had come directly from above. Whatever killed them didn't attack from the ground. It descended from the sky. But the mystery grew stranger still. When carbon dating was performed, the results shocked the researchers. The bones belonged to not just one group, nor even a single era. They came from multiple periods spanning centuries apart. Some skeletons dated back to the 800s, others to the 1100s, and some even more recent. It meant that Roopkund wasn't the site of a single tragedy. It was the site of multiple tragedies, occurring in the same place under eerily similar circumstances. Why would different groups of people from vastly different times all end up at the same remote lake, only to meet the same violent fate? There was no logical explanation, no historical record, no shrine, no settlement, no reason anyone should have traveled this deep into the frozen wilderness. And yet, they did again and again. As researchers examined the remains more closely, they noticed something else, something that made the entire investigation take a darker turn. The bones were not scattered randomly. They formed patterns, clusters, circles, as if the victims had gathered together in groups moments before death, as if they were facing the same direction, as if they were looking upward towards something in the sky before collapsing in unison. Some bodies were found with their arms raised, others with their hands clutching their heads. A few were positioned as though they had been knocked backward. The wounds, the positions, the clustering, everything suggested a sudden, overwhelming impact from above. But then came the discovery that changed everything. When DNA samples were analyzed, scientists expected to find a mixture of Himalayan ethnic groups, traders, shepherds, pilgrims perhaps. Instead, they found something impossible. A large portion of the skeletons came from the Mediterranean, people whose genetic signatures linked them to Greece, Turkey, and even parts of southern Europe Mediterranean travelers. In the middle of the Himalayas, hundreds of years before globalization, before mountain exploration, before any known contact existed, their presence here made no sense. No trade routes linked these regions. No historical accounts mentioned such a journey. There was no recorded expedition, no pilgrimage, no legend involving foreigners. And yet, the bones were undeniable. It was as if two worlds, two civilizations separated by thousands of miles, had collided here in this silent valley of snow and ice. The more answers scientists found, the more the lake refused to make sense. Because once they understood who died here, another question rose from the shadows. Why did they come? Why would hundreds of people, both Indian and Mediterranean, willingly climb to one of the most unforgiving places on Earth? Even modern mountaineers fear the altitude near Roopkund, the lack of oxygen, the unpredictable storms, the sheer cold. The environment kills with ease. And yet these people centuries ago came here on foot without warm gear, without equipment, without any protection. It felt as if they were drawn here, called here, led here by something lost to time. Some anthropologists believed it was a pilgrimage route, perhaps a sacred path followed by ancient clans. But Roopkund lies far off any known pilgrimage trails. There are no temples nearby, no shrines, no markers, nothing that suggests spiritual significance. Others believe the groups were fleeing danger, war, famine, or disease. But the bones show no signs of long-term travel, no injuries from conflict, no signs of illness or malnutrition. They arrived here in good health, and they died here in violence. Stranger still, personal items found near the lake, wooden staffs, rings, leather shoes, glass beads, hinted that the Mediterranean group had not stumbled here by accident. They had brought items too delicate for rough travel, as if they expected a peaceful journey. But Roopkund is anything but peaceful. Trekkers who visit the lake today speak of a strange feeling as they approach, an invisible heaviness pressing on the chest, crawling across the skin like static. Some report hearing faint rhythmic sounds echoing through the valley, as if a distant drumbeat were trapped beneath the ice. Others describe seeing movement in their peripheral vision, silhouettes on the ridge, shifting shadows against the snow. A few even claim the lake speaks, not in words, not in whispers, but in a presence felt deep in the bones, a cold recognition, like being watched by something old, impatient, and tired. Some return from the lake with nightmares, visions of a crowd gathered around the water, looking skyward, waiting. For what? They cannot explain. A feeling of dread fills the dream, a sense of inevitability, as though something enormous is descending from above. And when they wake, they often describe the same impossible detail: a sound, a rapid, heavy pounding, growing louder and louder until everything turns to white. Just like the victims, just like the stories, just like the legend of the goddess. But science refuses to accept legends. Science demands evidence. And so researchers returned to Roopkund again and again. Each time they came with new tools, new tests, new theories. But the lake seemed determined to guard its secrets, because no matter how much technology advanced, no matter how many samples were collected, what truly happened at Roopkund remained just out of reach, like a shadow dissolving into fog the moment you try to touch it. And as the ice melts each summer, revealing more bones that shouldn't exist, one thing becomes clear. Roopkund is not simply hiding a tragedy, it is hiding a pattern, a sequence, a cycle, something that has happened before, and something that perhaps will happen again. And if Roopkund is hiding a cycle, the next question becomes even more unsettling. What triggers it? What calls people here? What force gathers strangers from distant lands, only to strike them down the same way? To answer that, researchers turn their attention not to the bones, but to the land itself. The valley around Roopkund is strangely shaped. A natural amphitheater carved by glaciers over thousands of years. The cliffs on all sides rise steep and impenetrable, funneling the wind into haunting tones that shift and tremble like distant chanting. Even the lake's still surface seems unnatural, reflecting the sky with a clarity so sharp it feels like staring into another world. The more scientists mapped the area, the more they realized the terrain creates an eerie acoustic effect. A whisper spoken at one end of the valley can be heard clearly at the other. Footsteps echo out of rhythm. The wind amplifies into a low, steady hum, vibrating across the ice like a heartbeat. It is a place where sound behaves strangely, a place where silence feels wrong, a place where the environment itself seems aware. Climbers often describe the same moment upon reaching the lake, a sudden, overwhelming sensation that they should not be there, as if the mountain is trying to turn them back, as if they have crossed a threshold not meant for living beings. Many feel a pressure in their chest, not from altitude, but from something else, something emotional, something instinctive. One climber wrote in his journal, "It doesn't feel like we found the lake. It feels like the lake found us." Stories like this don't make it into academic papers. They are shared quietly, passed between trekkers over campfires, or whispered into the dark tents at night. But they paint a picture far more disturbing than any scientific report, because Roopkund is not just a physical location. It is an experience, a presence that becomes stronger the longer you stay. Researchers noticed something else. The skeletons around the lake were not only grouped by death positions, they were grouped by time, as if each tragedy occurred during similar environmental conditions. The air pressure patterns, the seasonal winds, the alignment of sun and shadows in the valley. It was as if the mountain remembered, as if the same moment in time repeated itself across centuries. But what is even more chilling is what happened when scientists analyzed the weather patterns. High-altitude hailstorms are rare, and massive fatal hailstones rarer still. Yet the historical climate data suggests that Roopkund's valley is one of the few places on Earth where such a deadly phenomenon could occur repeatedly, under just the right conditions. A perfect storm, a bullseye of destruction, a trap set by nature itself. But the theory still doesn't explain the Mediterranean travelers. It doesn't explain why a group from thousands of kilometers away appeared here with no historical record, no known purpose, no understandable motive. So experts proposed another idea. Perhaps Roopkund was a place of pilgrimage, a sacred site known to ancient cultures but forgotten by modern ones. If that were true, then the Mediterranean group might have traveled here intentionally, following some ancient belief, guided by a ritual long lost to history. But this idea only deepened the mystery, because buried among the bones were objects no pilgrim would carry. Beautifully crafted bronze rings, foreign coins, glass beads from distant coasts, items meant for trade or travel, not worship. The more questions scientists asked, the more Roopkund resisted. Even the local people, who rarely venture near the lake, speak of it as if it were alive. They say storms form above the valley without warning, clouds that gather in seconds, snow that falls in spirals, hail that strikes in strange rhythmic patterns. They say the air shifts, the atmosphere changes, and the valley wakes up. They say Roopkund is a place where the sky touches the earth, but not gently. Legends tell of strange lights seen above the lake on certain nights, orbs drifting over the snow, glowing faintly before vanishing. Some say they are spirits, others say they are warnings. A few whisper that they are something far older, guardians or watchers, or perhaps remnants of whatever force brought the victims here. Expeditions in the late 20th century reported unexplained electromagnetic readings near the lake. Compasses malfunctioned, batteries drained without reason, cameras captured strange distortions in images, faint streaks of white, shapes that looked like figures standing in the distance. When these photos were shown to local elders, they simply shook their heads and said, "That place remembers everyone who dies there." Whether superstition or truth, trekkers often describe an overwhelming feeling that the lake wants to be left alone. Some say the silence grows heavier at dusk, as if something beneath the surface is listening. Others describe the sensation of being watched from the surrounding cliffs, though no animals or people are ever seen. And then there are the dreams. Nearly every expedition, from scientists to hikers to locals, includes at least one person who experiences a vivid dream after approaching the lake. The details vary, but the core is always the same. A large group of people standing by the water. Wind whipping through their clothes, their breath visible in the cold air. And then, all at once, they look upward, eyes widening, faces twisting into fear. The sky darkens, the air changes, and then everything goes white. Some wake up sweating, others wake up crying. A few refuse to speak of what they saw, but all agree on one thing. It felt like a memory, not a dream, as if Roopkund were replaying its past, as if the lake were trying to show them what happened, or warn them what could happen again. This is what makes Roopkund more than an archaeological mystery. It is a psychological one, a spiritual one, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead feels thin, fragile, breakable. And the strangest discoveries were still ahead, because when researchers returned to the valley with new technology, ground scans, spectral imaging, advanced DNA methods, they found something that defied every explanation they had built so far.
Something buried deeper, older, more shocking than anything found on the surface. A truth that suggested Roopkund was not just a random place of death, but a destination chosen by the victims themselves, or by something else. Something they followed, something they trusted, something that led them to their final resting place. And what scientists discovered next would take the mystery of Roopkund to a level no one was prepared to face.
What the researchers uncovered beneath the surface of Roopkund was not simply a clue, but a revelation that rewrote everything they thought they knew. For years, scientists believed the lake was shallow, barely deep enough to hold a few meters of water. But when the ice melted further than usual during one unusually warm summer, the truth emerged from the depths. The lake was deeper, far deeper. A hidden basin extended beneath the surrounding snow, a cavity carved long ago by glaciers. And within it lay more bones, packed so tightly together that the water seemed to cradle them like a macabre cradle of the dead. These remains were older, much older. Some dated back more than 1,500 years. Others bore marks unlike any seen before: strange indentations, sharp fractures along the ribs, circular pits along the skull that did not match hail, avalanche debris, or weapons. It was as though something had struck them repeatedly, methodically, almost rhythmically. From above and from angles no natural event could explain. But even more disturbing were the objects buried alongside them. Fragments of wood strangely preserved by the cold, pieces of cloth woven in patterns not belonging to any known Indian cultures, and beads made from materials not found in the Himalayas: jade, obsidian, and a type of polished glass that glimmered with a faint green hue even in the dim mountain light. Artifacts that had no business being here. Artifacts from cultures separated by oceans, mountains, and vast distances. The lake was no accident. It was a destination, a place people kept returning to across centuries. But for what? One of the expedition leaders, a quiet, introspective man who rarely spoke to the media, shared something with his team that he refused to put into his official report. He said the deeper they dug, the stronger he felt a tension in the air, as if the lake was resisting them, as if something beneath the surface strained against an invisible boundary, disturbed by their presence. He described standing alone by the water at dusk, long after the researchers had returned to camp. The sky glowed orange, and the shadows stretched across the snow. He said the lake looked almost calm, serene even. And then, out of the stillness, he felt a sudden chill travel up his spine. Not a gust, not altitude, a sensation, a presence. He turned, expecting to see one of his colleagues, but he was alone. The valley, usually filled with the sound of wind, had become silent, unnaturally silent. And then from the center of the lake, he heard it, a faint, rhythmic thudding, like something knocking from beneath the ice slow. Deliberate, a heartbeat echoing through the frozen water. He stepped closer, and the knocking stopped. When he reported the sensation to the senior team, they dismissed it as altitude sickness or exhaustion. But others from the expedition had reported similar experiences. The feeling of being watched, of footsteps crunching behind them in the snow only to find no trace, of shapes appearing in their peripheral vision. One woman claimed she saw a figure standing on the ridge above the lake during the night. Tall, wrapped in something white, unmoving. But when she looked again, it was gone. Another team member swore he heard voices. Not words, not language. Just a chorus of faint murmurs rising with the wind. He covered his ears, but the sounds seemed to bypass hearing entirely, sinking straight into his mind like a memory not his own. The scientists began to avoid working alone. They began to avoid the lake at dusk. The expedition was unraveling. And then came the finding that pushed them from confusion into fear. Deep among the older remains, lying in the coal-black water, they found a set of bones different from the rest, taller, stronger. The skull elongated slightly, with a curvature unlike modern humans, not deformed, not damaged, simply different. At first, they thought it was a rare genetic variation, a deformity, an anomaly. But analysis showed the bone density was unusually high. The structure of the limbs suggested someone built for endurance, someone who could survive extreme conditions. And the cause of death? Not hail, not impact, not altitude, not disease. The skull bore no fractures, the ribs were intact, the spine unbroken. It was as if whatever force had killed the others had passed over this one entirely. A survivor, a guide, a leader. No one could agree, but buried near the body was something else, an object wrapped in decayed fabric, sealed tight by the cold. When they carefully unfolded the cloth, they found a small wooden figurine, hand-carved, smoothed by centuries, depicting a figure standing before a circle. Perhaps a sun, perhaps a door, perhaps something else entirely. Carved into its base were markings no one recognized. Not Indian, not Mediterranean, not from any known culture. Something older, something forgotten, something connected to Roopkund. All he said was, "Some things should not be analyzed too deeply." The team was shaken. Their data no longer made sense. Their theories collapsed under the weight of contradictions: Mediterranean travelers, Indian pilgrims, foreign artifacts, multiple death events, unexplained injuries, a mysterious figure who did not die from any known cause, and an object too ancient and too strange to categorize. Roopkund was no longer a puzzle. It was a warning wrapped in ice, a crossroads where people from different eras and lands converged, only to meet the same fate, a valley that pulled victims from across history as if compelled by something unseen, something that waited, something that watched, something that struck without mercy. And as the research team prepared to return home, believing their work was done, Roopkund had one final secret to reveal, something that would haunt them long after they left the valley behind. Because on the final night, just before they departed, a storm swept through the mountains. Snow whipped across their tents. Wind roared like a living thing. The lake churned beneath the ice, and at the heart of the storm, someone heard screaming, not human, not animal, something older, something coming from deep beneath the frozen water, something that should not have had a voice at all. When the storm ended, the lake was silent again, too silent, as if it had spoken once, and now waited for someone to listen. The storm that swept through Roopkund that night left the expedition shaken, not because of the cold, not because of the violence of the wind, but because of the sound, that impossible echoing scream rising from beneath the frozen surface. Most of the team dismissed it as wind distortion, a trick of altitude and exhaustion. But a few could not forget it. They described it as something hollow, ancient, layered, like a voice calling out across centuries, muffled by ice and time, a voice that did not belong to any living thing. When morning came, the lake looked different, still, dark, as if nothing had ever happened, but something had changed. The water level seemed slightly lower, the ice thinner, and along the edge of the shore, partially exposed by the violent winds, the team found footprints, human footprints, not modern, not booted, bare, 5 distinct sets, moving in a staggered pattern, as if a small group had walked across the snow barefoot long after the expedition began. The prints were fresh, too fresh, but impossible. No one had left the camp during the storm. No one could have survived out there. The path of these footprints led toward the ridge, and then abruptly ended, disappearing into a patch of disturbed snow where nothing else remained. The team refused to speak of it, not in their journals, not in their reports, not to each other. But the mountain had their attention now, and just when they thought the mystery could not grow deeper, the scientists analyzing the DNA made a discovery that split the entire investigation wide open. The Mediterranean remains, the ones that baffled historians, did not belong to a single group. They came from different regions, different families, different origins. But they all shared one thing: they had traveled together. Different lineages, different ages, different backgrounds. Yet they had walked the same path as though brought together by a shared purpose, a shared destination, a shared belief. Inside the pack of one Mediterranean individual, preserved by freezing conditions, researchers found a fragment of parchment, nearly disintegrated, but still carrying faint traces of ink. The script was unfamiliar, but a single symbol repeated along the edges, a circle with a dot in the center. The same symbol carved on the wooden figurine found earlier. The same symbol etched on stones along the ridge. The same symbol villagers claimed represented the eye of the mountain. No archaeologist could date it. No historian could connect it to any known culture. But the symbol undeniably predated both groups, Indian and Mediterranean. It was older than both, much older. The question now shifted. The travelers were not looking for Roopkund. They were following the symbol. But what did it represent? Some believed it marked an ancient migration route, a forgotten trail that crossed continents. Others believed it was tied to a religious cult, one so ancient that no record of it survived. But a few researchers, the ones who had seen what Roopkund could do, believed something far more unsettling: that the symbol was not a destination, but a warning. For centuries, mountain cultures told stories of places where the sky touches the earth, sacred valleys where gods descended, caverns where worlds met, locations where humans were not meant to tread. And in every legend, the meeting points were marked by circles, symbols of cycles, of repetition, of return. What if Roopkund was one of these places? What if the Mediterranean group came seeking it? Not because they were lost, but because they believed it was powerful. And what if the same force responsible for their deaths was not weather, not nature, but something older? Something that resided in the valley long before any human arrived. As the expedition dug deeper, they discovered that the Mediterranean travelers carried strange belongings, navigational tools shaped unlike any known instruments of the era, metalwork too intricate for their supposed time period, and a journal fragment written in a script no one could identify. Fluid, looping, geometric. Whatever they believed in, whatever they followed, it led them across thousands of kilometers of land and sea, all the way to the Himalayas, all the way to Roopkund. And they were not the only ones. Because after days of excavation, The researchers uncovered a third cluster of skeletons, older than both groups. Their bones were more brittle, their clothing reduced to fibers, their possessions almost completely dissolved by time. But one thing remained intact: a stone pendant hanging from the neck of one skeleton. A pendant carved with the same circle and dot symbol, but more intricate, surrounded by smaller rings connected by faint lines. A map, perhaps, or a diagram of something cosmic. One of the scientists, a specialist in ancient astronomy, suggested something extraordinary. The pendant resembled old star charts, not of constellations, but of planetary alignments, cycles, patterns, repeating events. It was as if these ancient travelers believed the valley was linked to a celestial phenomenon, something they intended to witness, experience, or perhaps survive. But survive they did not. The more the team learned, the less they understood, because every discovery suggested Roopkund was not merely the site of death, but the center of a pilgrimage spanning continents and centuries, a pilgrimage guided by a symbol older than recorded history. A pilgrimage that ended the same way every time, with skulls crushed, bodies scattered, lives extinguished in an instant. Whatever happened at Roopkund was not a single event, not a one-time tragedy. It was a repeating catastrophe, a pattern, a cycle, something tied to the sky, the mountain, and the symbol. But the most terrifying discovery was still to come, because buried deep within the basin, beneath layers of ice and sediment untouched for hundreds of years, the researchers found something none of them were prepared to see: a formation of stones, arranged deliberately, not natural, not random, a circle, perfect, precise, engineered, and at its center, a depression in the earth, shallow, wide, as though something enormous had once rested there, something heavy, something important, something missing. The scientists stared in silence, because this was no accident, no natural graveyard, no random point of death. Roopkund was a ritual site, and whatever those ancient people were following, whatever drew them across continents, whatever killed them, was something connected to the stone circle, something the mountain held, something the lake hid, something that had been here long before humans came seeking it, something that might still be here. The stone circle changed everything. It was too perfect, too symmetrical, too deliberately placed to be dismissed as chance. The formation hinted at intention, purpose, and the more the researchers studied its shape, the clearer it became that Roopkund was not a destination chosen by wandering travelers, but a place designed, crafted, and prepared long before any of them arrived. The circle was aligned with the surrounding cliffs in a way that seemed almost astronomical. When the morning sun rose behind the eastern ridge, its light sliced through a narrow gap in the mountains and struck the exact center of the stone ring. At noon, shadows of the stones aligned into a straight line, pointing toward the lake. And at dusk, just before the valley fell into darkness, the last rays of sunlight hit the stones in a pattern that resembled the symbol found on the figurine, the parchment, and the pendant. A circle, a dot, a cycle. Whatever this place once was, it was built with knowledge, precision, meaning. And the victims who died here, the Indians, the Mediterranean travelers, the older group whose identities were lost to time, they all seemed to be drawn into the same pattern, like moths seeking a flame they could not understand. Some of the team believed the stone circle marked an ancient ritual site, a place where people gathered to observe celestial alignments or perform ceremonies linked to the stars, but others saw something more sinister. The stones were arranged in a way that suggested containment, like a boundary, as if they were meant to hold something in place, a cage, a seal, a lock. If that were true, then Roopkund was not only a place where people came willingly, it was a place they were meant to keep away from. But humans do not heed warnings carved into stone, not when time erases their meaning, not when curiosity or desperation leads them where they shouldn't go. As the researchers examined the center of the stone circle, they uncovered another layer of sediment beneath the hollow. Darker, denser, almost metallic in composition. It was unlike the surrounding earth, a trapped residue of something burned, something melted, something ancient. The geological specialist scraped a sample, and as he held it up to the light, he whispered, "This wasn't shaped by water or time. This was shaped by heat. Sudden heat, extreme heat, a blast so powerful it altered the ground at its core. But there were no volcanoes here, no geothermal vents, nothing that could explain such intense thermal damage, nothing natural." And then came the realization that sent a tremor through the entire team. If something once rested in that hollow, something capable of generating that kind of force, then perhaps it was that same force, awakened or disturbed, that had killed the groups across centuries. Perhaps the people who came here were not drawn by faith, but by fear, by stories, by warnings, by attempts to seal something away. Perhaps the Mediterranean group wasn't seeking power. They were trying to stop it. But stop what? The answer began to form the night after the storm, in an event the researchers refused to discuss publicly. One of the scientists, unable to sleep, stepped out of his tent to breathe the cold mountain air. The valley was quiet but not silent. The faint hum of wind whispered between the cliffs. The snow beneath his boots crackled softly. Then as he approached the lake, he saw it. A thin mist rising from the water, though no heat source existed. The mist curled slowly upward, drifting like smoke from an unseen fire. And then it glowed, faintly, subtly, with a pale blue luminescence. The scientist blinked, convinced it was an illusion caused by moonlight or fatigue. But as he watched, the glow intensified, spreading across the surface of the lake like a thin film of light. He stepped back, his breath caught because as the glow pulsed gently, the water beneath began to shift. A ripple, a vibration, a trembling so faint it barely disturbed the surface. And then, emerging through the glow, he saw shapes beneath the ice, not just bones, not just bodies. Movement, as if something below had stirred. The scientist staggered backward, his heart hammering in his chest. He would later tell no one exactly what he saw, only that it was something wrong, something alive, something older than humans. But others would confess privately that strange things happened whenever the lake glowed. One researcher claimed the hairs on his arms stood up, as if electrified. Another felt pressure behind her eyes, as if an unseen force pressed against her skull. A third described hearing a faint rhythm, a beating sound, distant but steady, matching the pulse of the glow, a heartbeat. From beneath the ice, word spread quietly among the team. Some thought it was seismic activity. Others believed the mountain's frozen waters were interacting with minerals below. But a few, especially those who had seen the stone circle, believed something else. Roopkund was responding, awakening, remembering. The scientists decided to leave early. They packed their samples, dismantled their equipment, and prepared to descend the mountain before another storm trapped them there. But Roopkund had one final whisper to offer before they left. As they trekked away, one of the team members glanced back at the lake. The sunlight caught the water just right, revealing something that made her freeze in place. The circle and dot symbol, the same one found on artifacts and bones, was faintly visible beneath the ice, drawn by nature or by something else. It was enormous, stretching across the lake floor, carved so deep it could only have been etched by immense force or over centuries. As the sunlight shifted, the symbol faded back into darkness. She hurried to catch up with the group, her mind racing with questions she didn't dare ask out loud. Because one thing had become undeniable. Roopkund was not just the site of multiple tragedies. It was part of a design, a message, a memory. Something ancient lived here. Something that people from across continents and centuries came seeking or fleeing. Something the stone circle was built to contain, and something the lake was beginning to reveal again. The deeper the researchers looked into the origins of the stone circle, the more cracks appeared in the accepted history of the region. The symbols were not local, the artifacts not culturally aligned with any known civilization, and the strange hollow at the center of the circle suggested something monumental had once been placed there. Something deliberately removed or deliberately lost. But the question that haunted everyone was simple. What happened on the days these people died? What were they doing? What were they waiting for? The answers began to emerge when the team collected all the available carbon-dated remains and plotted their estimated death years on a timeline. At first, the pattern looked chaotic, clusters separated by centuries, then sudden gaps, then more clusters. But when the data was compared to astronomical records, recordings of planetary alignments, solar cycles, lunar anomalies, an eerie alignment emerged. Nearly every death cluster occurred during the same celestial event, a convergence of the sun, the moon, and a particular star cluster above the Himalayas, forming what ancient astronomers called the Eye of Midwinter. The same pattern carved into the pendant, the same pattern inked on the parchment, the same pattern faintly etched beneath the lake's ice. It meant that the Mediterranean travelers, the Indian pilgrims, and the ancient group all arrived at Roopkund on specific years. Not randomly, not accidentally, but following a cycle older than any kingdom, older than any human scripture. Every time the heavens aligned, people came here. Every time they came, they died. Not by human hands, not by avalanche, not by disease, by something else entirely, something connected to that alignment, something connected to whatever once rested in the stone circle. One of the researchers, a quiet astrophysicist, proposed something radical, something that caused arguments, shouting, fear. She suggested that the stone circle wasn't a shrine, but a marker, a warning. A place that aligned perfectly with the sky above it, acting as a kind of cosmic clock. When the heavens took a specific shape, the valley responded, the mountain awakened, the lake awakened, and whatever force had been sealed or contained here long ago came back into alignment with the world above. As she spoke, the others listened in silence. Their breaths fogged the air. No one wanted to believe her, but the evidence, laid out across the floor of the expedition tent, made denial impossible. All the deaths happened under the same sky configuration, she said, and they will happen again. Her words hung in the air like frost, unmoving cold, heavy. Someone finally asked the question the group had avoided. Is the lake dangerous? Only during the alignment. She shook her head. No, the alignment doesn't create the danger. It reveals it. Her voice broke slightly. Whatever is buried here is affected by the sky. Some felt the world tilt a little under their feet. The idea was absurd. Something beneath the lake responding to the heavens like a living thing, like a creature, or a force with awareness. But the more they thought about the glowing mist, the pulses under the ice, the impossible warmth rising from the depths, the less absurd it seemed. And then came the most disturbing discovery of all. When the researchers analyzed the skull fractures found in every group, they realized something chilling. The force that killed them was not random, not chaotic. It was controlled. The impacts were uniform in size, angle, and depth. Far too consistent for hail, far too targeted for falling ice. It was as if something had struck them from above with perfect precision, 1,000 years apart, 100 years apart, again and again. The astrophysicist offered a theory that made even the bravest among them go pale. What if, she whispered, what if the stone circle was built to focus something, to capture something coming from above? A beam, a burst, a phenomenon that only occurs when the sky aligns? A directed force, a descending strike, a pattern repeated through centuries. The idea echoed through the room like a ghost. If the mountain was a structure, if the valley was a natural amplifier, if the stone circle was a focal point, then Roopkund might not have been the site of a tragedy. It might have been the site of an event, a cosmic mechanism, a celestial cycle, something that activated when the alignment returned. But the question no one dared voice was simple. Was it natural or constructed? Was the force that killed them a moment of nature so ancient and rare humanity had forgotten it? Or was it a remnant, an echo of something that someone somewhere had built? Something capable of reaching down from the sky with lethal precision and erasing anyone who stood inside the circle. And if that were true, then the Mediterranean travelers, the Indians, and the older group were not victims of chance. They were witnesses, or participants, or sacrifices. The team began digging through the snow around the stone circle, searching for more evidence. What they found next chilled them more than the wind ever could. Buried under a thin layer of sediment was a flat stone slab, polished, etched, untouched by time. At its center was the symbol of the circle and dot, but beneath it was a single line of script, perfectly preserved, written in a language no one could read. It did not look ancient. It did not look crude. It looked deliberate, precise, almost modern in its symmetry. The characters curved like constellations, flowing gracefully across the stone surface. Some of the strokes resembled star charts. Others looked like mathematical symbols. But at the very bottom was a single, unmistakable image. A group of people standing in the circle, gazing upward towards something descending from the sky. The team stared at the stone, speechless. Their minds raced. Their hearts pounded. Their breath halted.
Forgive us our
Whatever they were looking at,
Hallowed be thy name.
it seemed to depict
Pray
the
for us
exact
sinners
scene
now and at the
recorded in
hour of
every
our death.
skeleton cluster. As if someone had known. As if someone had seen the cycle before it happened. As if someone had left a warning for future generations. But warnings are useless if no one can read them. The winds around the valley howled as if urging them to leave. The sky dimmed. The temperature dropped sharply. And for the first time since arriving, the team felt something undeniable. They were not alone, not watched by animals, not by ghosts, not by the mountain, but by something deeper, something older, something waiting beneath the ice, listening as they uncovered truths long buried. Something that had awakened once again. The atmosphere in the valley shifted after they found the etched stone slab. It felt as if every breath drawn by the researchers disturbed something invisible in the air. Something that had been dormant for centuries and was now stirring, awakened by their questions, irritated by their presence. The wind, once constant and familiar, became unpredictable. It moved in sharp bursts, curling around their tents like fingers dragging through cloth. That night, the team gathered in their main tent, a dim lantern flickering between them. No one spoke at first. They simply stared at the slab laid gently on the center table, its carved symbols glowing faintly under the trembling light. Every person present felt a single unspoken truth. They had uncovered something not meant to be uncovered. One of the younger researchers, hands trembling, broke the silence. "What if this valley wasn't a place people came by choice?" she whispered. "What if they were drawn here, summoned here?" The others exchanged uneasy glances because deep down they felt it too. The inexplicable footprints in the snow, the glowing mist, the pulse beneath the lake, the dreams, the cycle, the alignment, the feeling that the mountains themselves were leading them somewhere. But the most disturbing idea was the one no one wanted to acknowledge. What if the travelers from centuries ago weren't seeking power, but fleeing something? What if Roopkund wasn't their destination, but their last resort? Outside, the wind howled violently, pressing against the tent walls. Snow hissed across the ground. The temperature dropped like a stone. Then, as if responding to their fear, a sound echoed across the valley. A deep, rhythmic booming, slow, steady, like the beat of an enormous heart muffled by layers of ice and stone. Everyone froze. The sound came again and again, a pulse rising from beneath the lake. The astrophysicist gripped the table, her eyes wide. "It's aligning," she whispered. "The cycle is aligning again." The team rushed outside. The sky above Roopkund had changed. Clouds moved in unnatural patterns, forming curved streaks that spiraled toward a single point directly above the valley. The moonlight bent strangely, refracting across the ridgeline, as if the air itself had thickened. And the lake was glowing, a faint blue shimmer, like the breath of something sleeping beneath the surface. The water vibrated softly, sending tiny ripples outward across the ice. One researcher fell to her knees. "It's happening again," she whispered, "just like it did for them." Then came the voices. Soft at first, a murmur carried by the wind, a whisper crawling across the ice. Not words, just sound fragments, like memories bleeding into the present. The astrophysicist, shaking, clutched her head. "It's not the wind," she gasped. "It's them. They're echoes, imprints. The people who died here. They're repeating what happened." As the voices rose, overlapping, distant yet close, shapes began to form around the lake, shadows against the snow. Figures, dozens of them, then hundreds, blurred, translucent, barely visible, but real, Human silhouettes standing in the same positions as the skeleton clusters, facing the same direction, all looking upward. The team stumbled backward in terror. One figure stood closest, a tall outline with the faint silhouette of something hanging from its neck, perhaps the same pendant found in the lake. It raised its arms slowly, deliberately, and pointed toward the sky. The team followed its gesture. Above them, the clouds were spiraling open, revealing a patch of dark sky where the stars aligned into a familiar shape. The eye of midwinter, the exact alignment seen in the pendant, in the parchment, in every death cluster across history. The moment the alignment completed, the lake convulsed. A violent surge of light burst from the water, illuminating the valley with an otherworldly glow. The shadows of the ancient dead flickered, distorted, and collapsed all at once, like 1,000 candles blown out in a single breath. The sound that followed was deafening, a deep roar, as if the sky itself were splitting open. The ground beneath their feet trembled. Snow exploded upward in a blinding white plume, and a force, unseen but brutal, rushed through the valley like a descending hammer. The team felt it before they saw anything, a crushing pressure filling the air, pushing against their skulls, tightening their lungs. One researcher screamed, another fell. The astrophysicist shouted over the roar, "It's the force! This is what killed them! It's..." Her words were swallowed by the storm. The pressure intensified. The sky blazed with a shaft of pale light that cut straight down toward the stone circle. The snow within the ring blew aside as if repelled by invisible energy. The mountains shook violently. Ice cracked. The glow from the lake pulsed faster, brighter, almost alive. Then just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The light vanished. The roar ended. The pressure lifted. Silence swept across the valley. The team lay sprawled on the ground, gasping, disoriented. Some were crying, some shaking, a few staring blankly at the lake, unable to speak. The glow was gone, the water still, the valley calm. Whatever had awakened had gone back to sleep slowly, carefully, terrified. The team gathered their things and fled the valley before dawn. They did not speak. They did not look back. They did not rest until they reached lower ground. And even then, no one slept. When they finally reported their findings, the official documents were clinical, sterile, stripped of all supernatural elements. Terms like unknown natural phenomenon, acoustic anomaly, and ancient cultural convergence replaced the truths they had witnessed. The glowing lake was omitted, the voices ignored, the shadows erased, the stone slab buried in an archive, the alignment declared coincidental. The world was not ready for what Roopkund held. Perhaps no world ever could be. But those who were there, those who saw the alignment, those who heard the pulse beneath the ice, know the truth. Roopkund is not a grave. It is not a pilgrimage site. It is not even a warning. It is a cycle, a mechanism, a convergence point where something ancient meets something celestial, a doorway between earth and sky, a place where time folds inward, a place that remembers, and the alignment will come again. Years from now, decades, centuries, the sky will shift, the mountains will respond, the lake will glow once more. And when it does, the dead will not be the only ones waiting. The team never spoke publicly about what happened in the valley, but silence does not erase memory. Silence only traps it, lets it haunt deeper. And in the weeks that followed their escape from Roopkund, The truth began to unravel within their minds like frayed strands of rope, pulling them back toward the lake, whether they wished it or not. At first, it appeared as simple exhaustion, fatigue, nightmares. But then all of them, every single member of the expedition, began experiencing the same symptoms. Sudden flashes of cold across the spine, faint echoes of distant murmurs in quiet rooms, the sense of being watched even in crowded cities. Some saw shadows moving behind them where no shadows should be. Others described hearing the same rhythmic pulse they heard beneath the ice, faint, like the memory of a heartbeat following them into sleep. One of the junior researchers, a young man with a steady mind and a calm demeanor, vanished 2 weeks after returning home. When authorities searched his belongings, they found pages upon pages of sketches, drawings of the stone circle, the alignment of stars, the symbol etched on the pendant, and in the margins, written again and again, "It's calling again. I hear it. The sky is shifting." On the final page, a crude drawing of the Roopkund Valley with a single phrase beneath it, "I have to go back." No one ever found him. When the rest of the team learned this, dread pooled inside them like ink spreading through water, because each of them, whether they admitted it or not, had felt the same pull, the same whisper in their dreams, the same strange curiosity that bordered on compulsion. Something about Roopkund was unfinished. Something had awakened and had left its mark on them. One of the senior archaeologists, unable to sleep for days, began re-examining all the photos and scans taken during the excavation. Hours passed, then days. And then, one night, he called the astrophysicist in a trembling voice. "There's something we missed," he whispered, "something beneath the stone circle." She rushed to his home. The images he showed her sent chills racing across her skin. During one of the drone scans, taken mere hours before the alignment, there was a brief distortion in the infrared feed. At first, it looked like a camera glitch, a flash of thermal energy beneath the lake. But when magnified and recalibrated, the feed revealed something far stranger, a shape, circular, massive, lying deep beneath the center of the lake, buried under centuries of ice and sediment. Not a structure, not a natural formation, something metallic. The scanned outline was faint, but unmistakable. A smooth, curved surface with sharp edges, partially shattered long ago, almost like a vessel, or a shell, or something designed to contain energy. The archaeologist whispered, "That hollow in the stone circle. It wasn't just symbolic, something rested there. Something fell from the sky and landed in that valley." The room fell silent. Across the Himalayas, legends tell of sky stones that fell in ancient times, carrying curses or spirits or messages from the heavens. But Roopkund's artifact, whatever it was, had been buried too deep to recover. And if it was responsible for the bursts of energy during the alignment, then it might still be active dormant, waiting. The astrophysicist leaned closer to the screen. Whatever it is, it responds to celestial alignment. That's why every group died during the same sky pattern. They arrived when the cycle was active. She swallowed hard. And we were there too. The realization was suffocating. They had survived something that erased entire groups across history, not by luck, but because the alignment had ended seconds before the force struck again. Seconds. The team sat in silence, each imagining how close they had come to becoming the next cluster of skeletons scattered around the lake. Then the archaeologist spoke again, his voice barely audible. What if the next cycle is soon? The astrophysicist's hands shook as she pulled up astronomical software. She plotted the eye of midwinter, adjusting for precession, orbital drift, and historical alignments. Her breath hitched when the calculation finalized. The next alignment was not far, not centuries away, not decades. It was approaching within their lifetime. And something else, something darker, lay hidden in the calculations. The last alignment, the one that had nearly killed them, was incomplete, slightly misaligned by the shifting of Earth's axis over centuries. But the new alignment, it would be perfect, a complete convergence, stronger than any before it. If the ancient force was triggered by alignment, if the stone circle amplified it, if the buried object responded to it, then the next cycle could be catastrophic. The archaeologist stared at the updated sky chart, his voice a hollow whisper. Next time, it won't just be Roopkund. The astrophysicist closed her eyes. She had no words because she knew he was right. The force beneath the lake was growing stronger. The patterns were aligning, and the cycle was accelerating. Something ancient was waking, something with reach, something that did not care about humans, only about the sky above and the cycle it obeyed. She turned off the screen and whispered into the darkness. We didn't survive, Roopkund. We were just spared. Outside, thunder rumbled across a clear night sky, a sound that did not belong, a warning carried on air. The cycle had already begun, and Roopkund was only the first sign. The rumble that rolled across the sky that night was not the sound of weather. The meteorological maps showed no storms within 1,000 kilometers. The air was still, the stars were clear, and yet the sky had spoken. The team tried to return to normal lives. They tried to forget the lake, the alignment, the pulse beneath the ice. But Roopkund had imprinted itself onto them, like a scar beneath the skin, always there, always throbbing, always waiting. It began subtly. A government official contacted the lead archaeologist, asking for a private debrief. Another official visited the astrophysicist, questioning her about anomalous readings detected near the Himalayas within days. The entire team received identical documents, sealed, stamped, and marked with the emblem of the Indian Intelligence Bureau. Mandatory confidentiality orders, legally binding. Unquestionable. Roopkund was now officially classified. The reason given was vague. To prevent public panic, misinterpretation of findings, and disruption of local stability. But the archaeologist knew better. He could see it in the official's eyes. Fear, the kind born from knowledge too heavy to contain. They knew something. Not everything, but enough to be afraid. During one meeting, an officer made a mistake. He spoke too freely, too honestly, forgetting for a moment that scientists are trained to observe every detail. There have been events, he whispered, occurrences in other regions. It's not just your lake. The room fell silent. Other regions? Other events? Other cycles? The officer quickly corrected himself, forcing a smile, but the damage was done. The archaeologist leaned forward, voice barely steady. What other regions? The officer said nothing, but his silence spoke louder than any explanation. That night, the archaeologist called the astrophysicist. His voice trembled. It's not just Roopkund, he said. There are other places. She didn't respond at first. She didn't need to. She had suspected this from the beginning. The stone circle's alignment, The astronomical cycle, the flawless precision. Roopkund was too perfect, too deliberate, too engineered to be unique. Something that powerful, something that ancient, something that responded to the sky, could not exist in isolation. She opened her laptop, accessing global geological and atmospheric databases. One by one, she entered the coordinates of Roopkund as a reference point, looking for anomalies with matching signatures. Her breath caught as the first match appeared, a valley in northern Kazakhstan, remote, frozen, uninhabited. Scientists once recorded a burst of inexplicable electromagnetic interference there during a winter alignment centuries ago. Locals spoke of a silent crater where animals refused to walk, a place where compasses spun in circles, a place where metal tools rusted overnight. A second match appeared, then a third, a barren plateau in Siberia, a crater in Mongolia, a desert basin in Iran. Each site shared the same characteristics: a circular depression, ancient stone markers, strange burial clusters, electromagnetic anomalies, cycles of unexplained deaths. The pattern was undeniable. Roopkund was not a single mystery. It was one point in a network, a chain of ancient sites stretching across continents like nodes in a forgotten map. The astrophysicist felt her chest tighten. "These sites are connected," she whispered. "Whatever happened at Roopkund happened in all of them." But that was not the most terrifying part. When she overlaid the astronomical alignment onto the map, the truth emerged with chilling clarity. All the sites aligned perfectly beneath the eye of midwinter. A celestial path, a trajectory, a cycle of descent, as if the sky itself had once traced a line, touching down on Earth at specific points, leaving marks behind. The archaeologist stared at the map, his voice cracking. Someone charted this before. Someone recorded it. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a leather-bound journal belonging to a Himalayan survey explorer from 1939. The journal was damaged, torn, and stained by time, but several entries remained clear. Unnatural light observed. Circular stone markers identical across regions. Local nomads speak of the falling eye. These places, they wake together. The next pages had been ripped out deliberately. Someone had removed them. The archaeologist flipped to the final entry, the one that kept him awake at night. If these sites activate together, the effect could be global. He looked up slowly. Global. The word tasted like ice. Not a valley, not a region, not a lake. The entire planet. The astrophysicist felt her pulse quicken. She scanned all the data she had, every anomaly, every alignment, every seismic echo, every electromagnetic disturbance. And then she saw it. The trend no one had noticed. The intervals between alignments were shrinking. The energy spikes were growing stronger. The sites were becoming more active. The cycle wasn't just returning, it was accelerating. The night deepened as they stared at the map, fear crawling through their veins. Whatever fell from the sky centuries ago, whatever embedded itself beneath the lake, whatever the stone circles tried to contain, was waking faster now, as if responding to something, as if preparing, as if calling. The archaeologist whispered what both of them feared most. What if the ancient travelers weren't worshippers? What if they were trying to stop something, trying to seal it away? The astrophysicist swallowed hard. And we unsealed it. Lightning flashed outside, but the sky was clear. No storm, no clouds. Just a single blinding streak of white across empty air. A warning. The next cycle was approaching, and this time, the world would not be spared. The flash of lightning across a clear sky left an afterimage burned into their eyes. A streak of white carved into the night, sharp and unnatural. No thunder followed. No clouds approached. It was as if the atmosphere itself had torn open for a moment and sealed again. The astrophysicist stood frozen, one hand pressed against the window. Her reflection, pale and shaken, stared back at her through the glass. In the stillness, she heard something, so faint she questioned her sanity. A low hum, soft, vibrating from somewhere deep beneath the earth. She turned to the archaeologist. "Do you hear that?" He nodded, jaw clenched. "It's the same frequency we recorded at Roopkund, right before the alignment." Neither of them slept that night, not because they chose to stay awake, but because every time one of them closed their eyes, the dreams returned. Cold valleys, melting ice, the shadows of people long dead, standing motionless in the snow, facing the sky as if awaiting judgment. At dawn, news alerts began pouring in. First report: a remote village in Kazakhstan reported strange lights on the horizon, glowing rings circling above the silent crater. Second report: in Mongolia, a team of reindeer herders described hearing drumming from beneath the ground. Third report: satellite stations in Russia detected a spike of electromagnetic interference across a circular patch of tundra, perfectly matching the shape of the stone circle at Roopkund. Fourth report: in northern Iran, a shepherd claimed the earth vibrated beneath his feet and the dust around him rose in swirling patterns, forming a faint ring before falling silent again. All on the same night. All within minutes of each other. All aligned along the same celestial path. The archaeologists spread a world map across the table, marking each new anomaly. The lines began to form, curving across continents, arcing through mountain ranges, connecting deserts, lakes, and tundras. And at the center of every line, every intersection, every convergence, was the eye of midwinter. The astrophysicist's hands trembled as she traced the path. "It's not random," she whispered. "It never was. These are ancient sites, nodes in a global circuitry. Something hit the Earth long ago, or came to the Earth, and its influence spread across continents." The archaeologist swallowed. "And now it's waking up." But they were not the only ones aware. By afternoon, an unmarked black vehicle pulled up to the astrophysicist's home. Two men stepped out, wearing formal suits without insignias. Their expressions were stern, their eyes cold. "We need to speak," one said. They sat at the table in silence as the officers laid out a folder stamped classified. Eyes only. Inside were photographs, grainy satellite images of light bursts, seismic ripples, and heat signatures across the same global sites they had identified. "We've been monitoring these regions for years," the officer said. "Small activity at first, easily dismissed, but over the last 6 months they've intensified." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. 3 weeks ago, we recorded a pulse, a spike of energy originating from beneath Roopkund, strong enough to interfere with military satellites. The astrophysicist's voice was barely audible. "A pulse?" The officer nodded. "Something beneath the lake sent out a signal." The archaeologist leaned forward. "A signal to what?" The officer didn't answer. He didn't need to. The implication lingered in the silence. A signal to the other sites, a signal to the sky, a signal to something beyond Earth. The officers continued. "We believe the next alignment will trigger something larger than what happened during your expedition. We need your research, your recordings, your analysis." The astrophysicist felt a chill crawl up her spine. And if we refuse? The officer looked her dead in the eyes. You won't. The threat was clear. The demand was non-negotiable. But as they spoke, something else began unfolding across the world. Something that none of them saw coming. Reports rolled in from different countries. Birds migrating off-season, flying in perfect circular formations. Herds of animals abandoning entire regions as if fleeing from something unseen. Strange vibrations recorded deep in mine shafts, mimicking the pulse of Roopkund. Rivers changing flow patterns for minutes at a time before returning to normal. Fishermen near the Caspian Sea witnessing a column of water rise and fall as if something massive moved beneath it. It was happening everywhere the cycle was beginning. That night, the archaeologist received a call from a private number. A shaky voice spoke on the other end. You don't know me, the caller said, but I'm from the 1939 survey. My grandfather was part of the last expedition to Roopkund, the one before your team. The archaeologist's breath caught. The caller continued. My grandfather left behind a journal, pages he never submitted. He said something happened the night before he fled the mountain, something he swore would follow him if he ever spoke of it. The archaeologist whispered, What did he see? Silence. Then the caller's trembling voice. He saw people standing on the lake, hundreds of them. But they weren't real. They weren't alive. They were repeating, the same word used by their own team. The caller inhaled shakily, and my grandfather said this, They are not the dead, they are the warning. The archaeologist's hands went numb. The call ended abruptly, and then a familiar vibration began to hum through the floor, soft, steady, rhythmic. He pressed his ear to the wall, and his heart sank. It was the same pulse they heard beneath Roopkund, except now, it was hundreds of miles away from the lake. It had followed them. The astrophysicist called moments later. Her voice panicked. It's global. The resonance, it's rising everywhere at once. The cycle's activating sooner than predicted. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, We're running out of time. As she spoke, the window behind her rattled, not from wind, not from traffic, but from a deep subsonic force traveling through the earth. A heartbeat spreading across continents.
It's a skull.
The same heartbeat buried beneath Roopkund. The same heartbeat that had killed hundreds over centuries. The cycle was no longer waiting for alignment. It had already begun. The pulse spread through the world like a whisper carried by the bones of the earth itself. It traveled beneath oceans, through mountains, across deserts and cities, slipping beneath the feet of billions who never felt a thing, yet instinctively sensed that something had shifted, something ancient, something inevitable. In the days that followed, strange reports flooded the news. Animals abandoning forests, migrating in straight lines toward nowhere. Schools of fish rising to the surface in perfect circles. Storm clouds forming concentric rings above remote landscapes, even when no moisture existed in the air. Instruments in observatories malfunctioning simultaneously, struck by the same rhythmic static. Radio frequencies around the world pulsing in perfect unison, then falling silent. The archaeologists and the astrophysicists watched the world change from the shadows of their own homes, unable to warn anyone, unable to speak openly. The government lockdown on information was absolute. Every anomaly was dismissed as coincidence, weather distortion, or digital interference. But it wasn't interference. It was synchronization. The cycle that once took centuries to wake was now accelerating like a heartbeat rising in a body brought out of slumber. One night, unable to endure the silence any longer, the astrophysicist drove through the city, following a vibration she felt more than heard. It thrummed through the steering wheel, the metal frame of the car, the very air she breathed. Her heart pounded in time with it, like her body itself had become a tuning fork to something cosmic. She pulled over near a hill overlooking the entire city and froze. The clouds above were no longer drifting. They were turning, slowly, methodically, in a vast, spiraling rotation that mirrored the pattern of the stone circles. And then the clouds parted, not naturally, deliberately. A single gap formed in the sky, a perfect circle carved into the night. Through it, she could see the stars aligning, shifting into the shape she had feared most, the same shape carved into the pendant, the slab, the lake bed, the eye of midwinter. She whispered into the wind, "It's early. The alignment isn't supposed to happen yet." But the sky did not care for human timing. The cycle was no longer waiting for celestial mechanics. It was responding to something deeper, something awakened by the excavation, or by the imbalance in the global network of ancient sites. Her phone buzzed, a message from the archaeologist. "Turn on the TV now." Every channel, news, entertainment, sports, had been overridden by emergency broadcasts. Images flickered across the screen. Aerial footage of the silent crater glowing faintly, desert sand lifting into circular storms. Snow in the Himalayas rising and falling as if something enormous breathed beneath it. In one video captured from a helicopter above northern Mongolia, the ground itself vibrated in waves, broad circular ripples of earth expanding outward from a central point like a stone dropped into a pond. The world was waking. And then, every screen froze. A symbol appeared, a circle, a dot, surrounded by smaller rings. The symbol of the cycle, the symbol beneath Roopkund, the symbol older than civilization. People across the world stared in confusion, fear, awe. But the archaeologist knew exactly what it meant. "It's not a warning," he whispered. "It's a countdown." At that exact moment, an explosion of light erupted from the Kazakhstan crater. White, blinding, harsh. The signal was brief, but powerful enough to knock out satellites in orbit. Seconds later, an identical pulse burst from the Mongolian plateau, then from the Iranian basin, then from a region in Siberia never mapped by humans. The pulses converged, not toward the sky, but toward a point deep beneath the Himalayas, toward Roopkund. The astrophysicist grabbed her keys and raced to the archaeologist's home. He met her at the door, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder.
Did you hear that?
"You feel it too," he said quietly. She nodded. "The cycle is collapsing inward. It's not drifting around the world anymore.
Wait, zoom in right
It's
there.
focusing under the lake. Everything is being
Perfect,
drawn
let's
there."
book it.
He stared into the dark, his voice barely a breath.
Frame 42.
"We have to go back.
What is that?
Not to stop
appears to
anything,
be some kind
not
of
to
metallic
understand,
signature, Doctor.
not to warn, but because Roopkund was pulling them, calling them, the way it had called the Mediterranean travelers, the way it had called the ancient wanderers, the way it had called every group who stood around the lake before dying beneath the same sky. They drove without stopping, following the invisible pulse that seemed to thicken the air. As they rose into the mountains, the world below faded behind them, lights flickering out one by one as the resonance disrupted power grids. By the time they reached the final stretch of the mountain pass, they could both hear it clearly. The pulse beneath the earth, steady and slow, like the heartbeat of something vast and buried. The sky churned above them, clouds swirling around a single opening in the heavens. And through that opening, the stars aligned, perfectly exactly as depicted on the slab, exactly as carved on the pendant, exactly as shown in the lakebed symbol. A low, resonant hum filled the valley. Beautiful, terrifying, ancient snow trembled. Rocks shifted. The air vibrated. The lake glowed. Pale blue light rose from beneath the ice, illuminating the valley like a lantern held in the palm of a giant. Shadows gathered around the edges of the lake, hundreds of them appearing in the mist. The outlines of those who had died across centuries, their forms flickered, repeated, replayed. The archaeologist stepped closer. "It's not a warning," he whispered again. "It's a memory." The shadows lifted their arms slowly, pointing toward the sky. The astrophysicist felt tears freeze on her lashes. "What happens now?" she asked. The archaeologist looked into the glowing depths, his voice calm, resigned, almost reverent. "The same thing that has always happened." The lake erupted in white light, the valley filled with sound, a single earth-shaking pulse that echoed across mountains, across continents, across the world. And then, silence. The snow settled, the light faded, the sky closed. Where the archaeologist and the astrophysicist once stood, only untouched snow remained. The cycle had claimed them, just as it had claimed the others, just as it would claim again. Because Roopkund is not a mystery to be solved. It is not a phenomenon to be measured. It is not a curse to be lifted. It is a rhythm, a cycle older than humanity, a memory written across the bones of the earth. And somewhere beneath the ice, something stirs, something patient, something eternal, waiting for the next alignment, waiting for the next visitors, waiting for the next chapter. The skeleton lake keeps its secrets, but the cycle will always begin again.